I think it's important for everyone to kind of find their niche and really find what they want to dedicate their lives to. And that for me is kind of twofold. It comes down to teaching and it comes down to the research that I think is going to benefit not only my community, but hopefully all of humanity. My name is Tyler Corazao. I am a fourth-year undergraduate student at Texas A&M University. I study material science and engineering, minor in biomedical engineering, and I use he, him, his pronouns. Material science, it covers everything we touch, right? When we actually think through the periods of human history, right, a lot of them are named after the material of the time, right? The Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and now the Silicon Age. All of our development as people, a lot of the time relies on what materials we have access to and how that enables us to create new technologies. There are people who work on aerospace materials, there are people who work on structural materials for buildings, and I focus particularly on biomaterials, but it all comes down to the study of how materials structure the actual behavior of the individual molecules that compose a material leads ultimately to how a material behaves in whatever engineering application we choose. I'm a transgender man. My father came here from Peru. It's a part of my heritage that I'm still looking to get more connected with, but it is still definitely a part of my identity.
And could you also talk a little bit about where you grew up?
I grew up in Cedar Park, Texas, so just up the road from here in Austin. When I was born, it was quite a small suburb, and now it's, grown gigantic as the rest of Austin has. It's hard for me to say anymore, whether I was not out because I didn't feel personally safe or because I was kind of picking up on cues from the environment. I wasn't out at all in my youth. I didn't come out until I got into college. When I was growing up, I was very involved in the church, and my church overall was very accepting and good, but at the end of the day, regardless of what was being preached at the upper levels, there was still the general culture of the time, especially in the early 2000s going into the early 2010s, was still one of questioning the normalcy of all of this. Casual homophobia was very rampant, and that pervaded into my peers in the church, at school, in my household, everywhere. Trans almost wasn't a word yet, at least in my lexicon. I vaguely kind of knew what it was, but it wasn't something that I was super familiar with. My family was always very openly supportive, but not necessarily well educated on it, and you couldn't necessarily blame them. Both of them had come from relatively conservative backgrounds, each a different situation, but both of them were not super well educated, especially on trans issues. So it was always kind of a culture of we'll support you, whatever you want to do. But when it came to an actual revelation or something like that, it was a little more okay, what does that mean? So I did identify very briefly as a lesbian in high school, and that went over pretty well. I wasn't involved in any LGBTQ peer groups. I didn't really honestly want to be. At the time, I was kind of lone wolfing it. I felt better off not being super involved in those peer things. And in part, that was because I was facing so much ostracization from my peers, and that included both my cishet peers and my queer peers. I really lone wolfed it through a lot of it. Didn't have much in the way of peer support apart from a few very, very close friends. Those were my two people I talked to, and then everyone else I kind of just kept it quiet. I had role models in general, but especially thinking about even just male role models in general in my life, cis or trans, I didn't have a lot of, and I think that really is part of what stunted me in terms of coming out. I didn't even realize I was a trans man, capital M, until I was 16 or something, right? I'd been having these feelings since I was 11, but I didn't acknowledge that until I was about 14. I didn't know anybody personally that was out and that I could look up to. In fact, the only trans person I knew in high school was rather conveniently associated with one of my bullies, so that wasn't a person I could go talk to safely. My life at home was rough, and the men in my life were not a good part of that picture, right? And so a lot of my preteen and early teenage years, I really viewed myself as the battered woman. Myself and my mother, both of us were facing that at the time. I viewed masculinity as a bad thing. I generally viewed men as being violent and aggressive and hateful, and that was not something I ever wanted to associate with myself with. And so not having too many people up until a little bit later in life. I had a couple right around early high school that really obviously started things, kickstarted. So you can see, right, I met these people, and then about 2 years later, I was like, oh, I'm a man, right? Because these were good, safe people. And that was, one of the first times, at least that I can remember, that I really encountered men that I felt safe around and that made other people feel safe, and that I felt made an overall positive impact on their environments. Something I encounter a lot with other transmasculine individuals that I know now that have this fear that they are negatively impacting the people around them just by existing. It can really screw with your self-perception after a while if you grew up being that young woman that was just terrified of half the population around her because she had reason to be. Around middle school, I was fully okay, I am into women, that's a thing. Well, I started identifying as a lesbian, except I could not say that word, and I never could figure out why. I always rationalized it to myself as oh, I've heard people being bullied for that. It's not a slur, but I kind of rationalize it to myself as though I kind of see it as one, so I'm just gonna distance myself and I can be gay, but I'm not gonna call myself a lesbian. And through that time, I started kind of playing around with other pronouns, started kind of maybe going a little bit down the non-binary direction, just kind of feeling things out, and the whole time kind of rationalizing it to myself oh, well, I just kind of feel distanced from femininity because of this whole thing, because of bullying and all of this, and all of my weird, complicated relationship with gender in general. And I'd hoped that all of these things, realizing these things would make it better, and they didn't. It just kind of kept getting worse and feeling more and more uncomfortable in my own skin. Also, understandably, hitting puberty and having a lot of, fun stuff happen with my body. It finally kind of came to a head around age 16 where I was I can't get around this anymore. If people call me he, him by accident, it feels good, and I can't ignore that. And I'd probably been feeling that a lot longer than I wanted to admit it to myself. There were two people in the world that knew: my best friend at the time and my voice teacher. I don't really know what made me come out to her, but she actually was a rock for a long time. Came out to them and kind of decided I'm not gonna deal with this in high school. I'm already dealing with so much crap from my peers that I don't want to add anything more to their ammunition. So I told myself I'll wait till college, I'll come out in college. It was actually a really cool experience because when I got to Texas A&M, they paired us with roommates. I had tried to do their whole roommate matching thing and it just didn't work out. It kept falling through, so I just let them select a random roommate for me. And obviously they were doing same sex, right? And it turned out that the roommate they paired me with was non-binary, also identified as non-binary. So we became super fast friends. We're still best friends to this day. I didn't come out as soon as I wanted to. I had hoped oh, I can start freshman year and just and my parents, they were surprised when I came out, and then they were, they were supportive, but they were look, you live in a dorm right next to these young folks, but more of the typical people you expect at Texas A&M, right? Kind of the conservative stereotype. And they were I don't know if they would be pleased with suddenly living next to a man. So I backed down, decided, okay, well, I'll wait till the end of my freshman year, and I'll kind of start hormones over the summer, and hopefully I can come back in the fall and start living my life. And rather conveniently, this funny little thing called COVID happened, which was terrible in every way. I'm not making light of it by any means, but I know I'm not the only trans person who kind of took advantage of this convenient time where nobody saw you, right? Cameras off, never left the house. I went back to live with my mom, went on hormones May 2020. And came back to College Station in August, and I was very fortunate. My body really complied with a lot of my demands, and I was passing pretty well by that point. Also, rather fortunately, Texas A&M has a system for engineering students where your first year, you're a general engineering major, and then after that, you have to apply to get into your major of choice. And I actually did not get into my major of choice, full disclosure. I was originally gunning for biomedical engineering and didn't get into materials as my second choice. And I have no regrets about that. It's the best thing that ever happened to me for a lot of reasons. I really love what I do, but in particular, I changed majors, and all of these new people had no idea who I was, and it was kind of wonderful and kind of beautiful. And obviously since then I've grown a lot more into myself, and I've had some surgery and some other transition related care that has really helped me step along in the medical sense, and a lot of obviously social development as I've kind of learned to be this new self. I didn't interact with men very strongly at all through most of my life, and suddenly I had to learn how to be one. Most times the social interaction does look a little bit different, and that was challenging, to be so jarred by how differently men seem to interact with each other socially. And honestly, like one of the big things that I noticed was how suddenly I was very starved for like any form of like open, friendly affection, like touching wise, but even just like verbal affirmation of just like, you're cool, I like you. I wasn't getting much of that from any of my male counterparts, and thankfully I still had some good friends, especially within the LGBT community, that were providing that for me. But it was shocking, and I started to kind of look back on some of the experiences that I had with men earlier. Like, gosh, I just wonder how different this would be if so many men in our society weren't so starved of what really is a basic need. Very, very, very routinely I get pinpointed as gay, and I'm not. I'm straight as an arrow, to the great detriment and dismay of my officer team. But I do all the time, and like I understand why. I can look at myself in a mirror and like kind of see the mannerisms and everything that like aren't coming from that, right? They're coming from the fact that I was a teenage girl in 2013, and that sticks with you. But it is very interesting. In a lot of ways, it has like been an interesting journey with being trans and neurodivergent. Like, I don't know what's going on up there anymore. I also like, at this point, I'm not too concerned with it. Like, I know there's something going on, and I know at this point that I need to adapt my surroundings to suit my needs, and in the same way I need to adapt myself to suit my surroundings. And there's always that kind of push-pull of making yourself functional in neurotypical society while still finding ways to like keep yourself sane and help yourself actually enjoy life. I know one of my things, I'm talkative, and I can get very excited, and especially if I'm talking about something I'm excited about, I tend to jump on people, right? I tend to interrupt, and that gets read really differently when you're read as female versus when you're read as male. And that was something that was really kind of jarring to me, like realizing there was this whole separate level of dynamic there. Like, oh crap, like, I'm not trying to insinuate anything there, I'm just excited, I'm so sorry. Seeking trans healthcare while being neurodivergent can honestly be a bit of a hellhole. It comes down to like, remember to do your shots and going through the whole jumping through the hoops. I was very lucky to have an informed consent clinic, but not everyone has access to that. And even having my informed consent clinic, they're one of the only ones in the area. So they're booked out like crazy, and they're also a 2-hour drive from me. God forbid I miss an appointment. Well, now I'm SOL for a month. Getting my name changed is the worst. I am so sorry to anyone out there who has to do this at all, but especially while being neurodivergent. The amount of things I still come across that still have my dead name on them. Like, I changed that. Everyone around me like, no, you did not. You said you would 10 times and then you didn't. Okay, yeah, I didn't. When I was about 3 years old, starting there, I really wanted to be a veterinarian. I absolutely loved animals. I loved science. I loved everything to do with that. I wanted to be a helper and save the world and all of this. And I was committed, honestly. I had an article published in TVMA when I was in like 4th grade, which is really funny looking back. I started shadowing a vet starting in middle school, working my way up into high school. And honestly, what turned me off more than anything, well, number one, the student debt is severe for veterinarian, but also I found that the lifestyle didn't work with me as well as I thought. I realized that, yeah, I mean, so many of the vets, thank God they were candid with me, the vets and the vet techs would talk about, how their cases kept them up at night. I mean, really, it's a rough job. And so I realized that it just wouldn't be a good fit for me and how I worked. And it was devastating because that had been my entire life up until that point. I'd been planning on that. And my dad's an engineer, and he pushed on that because he obviously he knew, engineering is a lucrative degree. To be honest, I went along with it because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have many other passions that were lucrative. I was a horseback rider in my spare time. You can't make any money doing that unless you're really incredibly smart about your business. And I just wasn't a fan of the business side of things at all. And I did music. I was a vocalist, but the music world is its own bear. I mean, there's real risk involved there unless you're incredibly smart about how you run things. After bouncing back and forth, I was like, all right, I'll go to engineering school, see what happens. And I'll do biomedical engineering because I love medicine and it'll be great. And to be honest, getting into late high school, I was like, this is a crapshoot. Like, I'm going to drop out of college. I really, really thought I would, because I did absolutely terribly in high school chemistry. I hated it. I had to learn like the entire AP chemistry test the night before the exam because I just did not pick up any of it the entire year. And part of that was on me, but more than anything, I just hated the material. And I was like, well, I can't go into a biomedical engineering degree hating chemistry, but I do. What am I gonna do? And it stayed that way through my first year of college too. You know, I tried and I did okay, but I wasn't loving any of it. I genuinely fell in love with material science. I just instantly was all over it. There's this great book I'd hugely recommend it to anyone who's interested in the field. It's called Stuff Matters by Mark Medownick, and it's just this really interesting little like teaser into the world of material science. He goes through like 10 different everyday materials that we encounter and touch all the time and goes into the history of their development and all of the different little things that make it so miraculous and so perfectly suited to what we need it to be. That book made a huge difference, and at that point I also met my research advisor who I've been working with for too long now, and he made a huge difference because he did just offer me the spot, like on the spot. It was just like, you want a research position? Like, let's go, let's do this, and has been incredibly supportive of my research interests and my goals. And that made all the difference, because the funny thing now, like one of my favorite classes in college has been organic chemistry. I loved it. I had the best time ever in organic, and I sound absolutely insane saying that, but I did. And it really, what made the difference was, number one, you know, just like being so much more comfortable and less stressed. Like college has been stressful as, you know, all it can be. I mean, it's college, it is what it is, but it's such a different experience. I'm so much more resilient and able to handle that level of stress. And number two, it comes down to the people. That professor, you know, probably didn't know I was trans. I don't know, it might have shown up on the transcript somewhere, but he was, you know, just a really supportive, kind teacher, and that was someone that I really needed. And so that really also set in stone, like, wow, like I really want to be that for someone else. Like, this is really cool. There are a lot of professors I've encountered exactly like that, you know, my advisor included, who's just like, wow, like I really want to be to someone else what they were to me. The field itself is really interesting. I think we get into a lot of the nitty-gritty that other fields kind of hand wave. We study all the basic engineering curriculum, your thermodynamics, kinetics, you know, basic physics and chemistry, crystallography. How are crystal lattices structured and why are they that way, and how does that influence the properties? I'm not right now doing a full course in just soft matter characterization, just plastics and micelles and other things like that. How do we look at them and figure out what on earth they are and how they behave? Everything you touch and interact with on a daily basis has some level of material science engineering that went into it, no matter how ancient it might have been. And that is really cool to kind of be on the upstream end of engineering, really the very, very early concept, and still look out and see how your developments can impact the world. I always question the dichotomy of out versus not out, because I'm always kind of lingering in the half space. Since I came out, at least been of the opinion that like, I'll come out if it's like relevant, but I'm not just gonna like be out for the sake of being out. Partially for safety reasons and partially just because I don't always feel like it needs to be the most relevant thing about me. I think the community at Texas A&M too, the material science major at Texas A&M is super tight-knit and just a really fun place to be. I have been very pleasantly surprised by Texas A&M. My major has been an incredibly accepting place and somewhere I've really felt very safe. And unfortunately, I know from my experience as the president of OSTEM, that's definitely not the case across the entire university, and even within sects of my own degree is certainly not the case. And that sucks, you know, I mean, obviously I do my best, but as a student org leader, I have, you know, a good amount of influence, but definitely not enough to change the entire culture. I did a research internship at the University of California, Irvine. That obviously was a very different environment, but still one that I overall felt pretty safe in. I wasn't fully out there, but like I came out to a couple people and everything went pretty okay. Did an internship in New Jersey and kind of the same story, you know, felt fairly comfortable, but there's always like the question for me, does outing myself change someone's opinion of my work? My ultimate career goals have to do with me being a competent researcher and a good scientist. When I do come out, I do feel some pressure to really perform and say like, look, I'm here because I am very good at what I do. I just happen to be trans as a side product of that. My identity, whether I want it to or not, infiltrates everything I do every day. It does necessarily define the way I live my life, because whether or not I care about politics, politics is my life. I kind of have lived both worlds in a very short period of time. I actually brought it up in an interview for one of my internships. They asked like what kind of unique perspective I could bring to the internship. And I mentioned that the year before I transitioned, I'd gone to a career fair and I got no leads. And generally like the reps were like, come back to us next year, like you're whatever. And I came back a year later, nothing had changed about me besides my age. And to be clear, I'm not discounting that first year students unfortunately face a pretty difficult crowd. But still, the way that the recruiters responded to me, the interest they showed in me, the enthusiasm with which they interacted with me, it was night and day. It was completely bizarre. And so I brought that up. I hope most people in this country and in our society in general recognize that sexism is a thing. But that was loud. And that really informed a lot of how I view others and kind of asking me to question myself when I start to get overly critical of someone, just like stepping back and seeing how are my biases playing into this, right? How are my biases playing into how I'm interacting with this person? It also plays a lot into, I know a lot of different groups, different disciplines are really pushing into, with medical technology specifically, how do demographics change how you interact with those things. For example, how do different medical devices and medications affect women versus men? And that's amazing, to be absolutely clear, because up until this point, it's been just unfortunately something that's really horrifically understudied. And studies have shown that that's negatively impacting women, I could say certain genders. What is the basis of this study? Are you studying how the impact is determined by genetics or by hormones or by social standing, because that can absolutely impact your physiology to some degree. That applies to a lot of things. I know some labs are also doing studies on how like ancestry and race can also impact those things. And I think it's really important to have a super diverse perspective on both the study side, on just like actually who you're studying in these, but also on the research side, because you do sometimes need someone to ask these questions, right? I mean, I think about it in my group all the time. Someone will bring up a project that's largely women's health related, and I catch myself in the back. I see all these studies that have been done on cisgender women, and that's wonderful. Are there studies on other parts of the population? If there are not, why, right? Like, is anyone doing that? And if not, why is that gap not being filled? And if there are, then, well, we probably ought to be including them, because they may have some slightly different needs that need to be addressed by, the technology we're developing.
What is OSTEM, and also what role has OSTEM played for you?
OSTEM stands for Out in STEM, so it is an international organization. OSTEM Inc. Spans both the United States and the United Kingdom, and they have chapters scattered all across those places. So OSTEM Texas A&M obviously is a student chapter, and generally the focus of the OSTEM organization as a whole is to create better opportunities for LGBTQ plus people in STEM, right? Very similar to LGBT Tech. They have a large national conference. They provide scholarships and graduate school funding to select members. They partner with literally dozens, if not hundreds, of super accepting companies that are, actively seeking out LGBTQ people to come make their impact in their workforce and make them a better and more diverse place. And it's a really wonderful initiative. And so OSTEM at Texas A&M, we're a smaller scale version of that. We also partner with some companies to have them come recruit from our students. We take LGBTQ plus professors at Texas A&M to come give panels, tell us about their experiences in academia. We're working on more outreach, more service, more social events. Every day, half of the battle with this organization is just creating another safe space, especially for students in STEM specifically, where they can just, feel open and chill with other people, that are in their degree or in similar degrees, and just have a safe place to talk about their experiences. Because especially at an institution at Texas A&M that, like I said, has a reputation, all-male military school turned high-ranking research institution, a lot of the old Army days unfortunately still pervade a lot of the politics and a lot of the student experience. And it's something I think about a lot, because I've encountered several freshmen that when they say like I kind of feel like I'm the only one here. And that's devastating. There's over 70,000 students in this student body. Like, statistically, you cannot be alone. Texas A&M has like this entertainment body called MSC Town Hall that hosted this drag show called Draguland. It was a hit. I mean, really, it was such a successful event. It won like Program of the Year in 2021. They brought in like RuPaul queens. I mean, it was crazy. But it was canceled in 2022, and nobody's really sure why. OSTEM had a couple of current officers at that time that really invested in drag in general and LGBTQ rights in general, all of us were, who personally knew some of the folks at Town Hall who had been on the Dragonland committee and who were kind of like throwing their hands up like, we don't know what to do. The funding was pulled and we're not sure why. And so we agreed among our officer team that, OSTEM has pretty decent funding. We have a good track record with fundraising. We raised thousands of dollars. We spent hours in meetings every single week trying to get this thing on the road. I was on campus at like 2 a.m. putting out yard signs. We spent a long time pushing the administration specifically on what happened. We're just unable to get answers, and our signs were unfortunately very frequently defaced. That whole experience is what made me realize and really get into drag and also realize dang, this is important. This is the one night that Texas A&M got lit up rainbow, and it was taken away. And so we brought it back, and thankfully it was really successful. It was a sold-out show. We had 750 people in the theater, plus I think 30 or 50 virtual attendees. We submitted for OSTEM Chapter of the Year this year, and we won that. It was tiring, I'm not gonna lie. It was very emotionally draining to kind of constantly see not only the backlash, but also just the apathy from a lot of the student body. They were kind of like, well, it's just a drag show, why do you care? And some were like, well, this was always bound to happen because it's Texas A&M, and that is the way it is. And I always want to fire back at that with, but why? Why does it have to be? It's really, really important to me that in particular continues, whether through OSTEM's work or through another organization's work, because it really did redefine what OSTEM meant. It redefined what my vision of OSTEM was as that Texas A&M OSTEM chapter, but furthermore, changed my vision of what I can do to make my environment a better place. I realized how much power I have just as one person, but also as a member of the team. You just have to find the right people who are willing to go all in with you. I'm really glad I could be that for someone else. I'm really glad I could be that for Dragonland. I'm really hopeful that when it's my time to kind of spearhead one of those initiatives myself, that I have the right people to go with me. I never envisioned I'd get to this place. I never envisioned that I would be at the point where I just waltz into lab and say hi to all my lab mates and just casually start up an experiment from scratch and just present results to my PI. Here you go, this is what I did this week. And it's really fulfilling. I'm applying for PhD programs right now. And so it's really fulfilling to get the positive feedback in the form of admits and just in the form of comments from, potential future advisors and from my mentors that, yeah, my application was good. I worked hard on it and it has really paid off. And a lot of that I do owe in part to being able to be out and comfortable in the places where it matters most and just be able to fully put my whole self into my work every day. I really love to teach, so I really would love to go into a faculty position where I can both kind of mentor young researchers and help PhD students develop their work. Having had kind of the rough start that I did, I won already, I'm cruising at this point, I'm happy. All of us have the goal to be happy. And I mean, obviously this is understandable, but to expect yourself to go to bed happy every night is completely unreasonable, in my opinion, right? I mean, you just have hard days sometimes. But to always look and see a good endpoint. I look back and I see a lot of things that I don't like, choices that I kind of cringe at or that I just regret, but at the same time, I really can't say I regret a lot because it all got me to where I am. And I would have told myself to get involved with the community sooner. Find a space to really physically sit down with people in your community from all walks of life, from all ages, from all demographics, from all letters of the alphabet soup acronym. It is so important for us, especially in the wake of the COVID times that are unfortunately still ongoing, right? That we've realized more than ever how important it is for us to have those connections, and it makes a lot of the difference to find the people near you that are in your community.